Hey everybody, Tala here, and keeping up with my promise. I said I would do a video every day during the coronavirus pandemic. I think one of the installments each week should be a story of some sort. I figured I would open up and share the story of my spiritual awakening and share the significance of Mexico in my life. So a long, long time ago, in a land far, far away, Mom was a Las Vegas showgirl turned hippie. She's awesome. And both my parents were awesome. My father's no longer with us, unfortunately, but he plays into this story. I was around 4, 5 years old. We actually ended up moving to Mexico, my mother and I. Mom got sick of the winters up here. We were living with my grandparents. She just decided, we're gonna move to Mexico. The first time we moved to Mexico, we ended up living there just under a year. And she moved there with $15 in her pocket. And talk about a leap of faith. I mean, this woman is amazing. We went with a companion of hers for part of the time, and he had, stuff he wanted to do, and he just came back from spending some time in Bali, so he was on this whole spiritual quest himself. His name was Jason. And not to out you, Jason, but Jason Starr. Jason is about, I want to say like 6'5", maybe. The first time he came to my grandmother's house, I think, like I said, he just came back from Bali or Turkey, and he had a white suit on with no shirt and beads from here to his navel and a top hat. I think it was a white tuxedo, a top hat and a cane. And when she opened the door, he bows, takes off his top hat, and all these flower petals come flying out. And my grandmother, who is like Irish Catholic woman, she went, "Oh my God, it's Jesus Christ!" And I think she almost fainted. So just to paint the picture of my very colorful childhood, Jason is still to this day a very near and dear friend to both my mother and I. We decided to move to Mexico. Well, they decided to move to Mexico. I didn't really have much of a say. I was like 4. So we go to Mexico. So we end up in Chilam, as far end of Mexico as you can go. So in this direction, it would be like, whoop, right over here. Chilam is a tiny little fishing village on a peninsula where it literally had one road in and the same road out. She worked it out that she was going to trade teaching English in the one-room schoolhouse in the center of town for use of this little 2.5, 3-room, like stucco cottage on the beach. And it was like a mile outside of town. We would go into town every day, walk our way in, and we were like right on the beach. Like, you walk out our door and there was the sand. Like, there was the ocean. That was it. There was no crossing the street to get to it. We were on the beach. So it was pretty amazing, actually. We would walk this mile into town, but it was awesome. And you'd see vultures and you would see iguanas all the time. And there was this one stone wall that we had to walk past every day. Iguanas sunning themselves all over the walls. And there was this big daddy iguana that was like 5 feet long. He was awesome. He was gorgeous. We would get fresh plantains and fresh coconut right off the trees. The first time I ever had coconut, it was taken off the tree. They peeled off the green husk on the outside and cut it open with a machete. And the first coconut milk I ever had was still warm from being in the sun. And it was just off the tree. So I've been kind of spoiled with with coconut and plantains and mangoes and all that kind of beautiful tropical fruit, because we would literally just pluck it and eat it. We would walk this mile into town. We would go into the one-room schoolhouse and I would help my mother teach English, and I would be learning Spanish at the same time. Different shopkeepers were some of the parents, so they would provide us with food. And I don't know who owned the house, but they were like, yeah, go ahead, live in the house. So we traded, we bartered, and she still had her money, basically all of her money. And every once in a while, they would also give her money. I mean, you have to remember, it was basically a third world country at this point, and people weren't able to come in and teach to this very far outreached little village. It was huge for them. This was a fishing village. You know, I saw people going out in rowboats, coming back in and pulling sharks that were bigger than me at the time out of the rowboat, slicing it open and having all these fish spill out of them. They didn't have a lot of money, but they had kind of the best things life had to offer right there, you know, the most amazing sunsets. And they were on the beach, and all the food was pretty much provided for. The things that weren't, you know, were like bread, but really tortillas. I learned how to make corn tortillas by literally grinding the corn with these older women who were just so kind and loving. You would, you know, flatten out the corn and we would put it into this stone fire kiln that was outdoors. So I had these amazing experiences really, really early on. I don't know exactly why. Another American family came to Chilam, and we ended up hooking up with them, traveling to the mountains to meet Jason. This is where things start to get really bizarre. This isn't part of the awakening. This is just part of some of my experiences. And this can get a little graphic. So if you have young ones listening, you may want to just have them not listen to this part. So we're traveling with this family, and I remember they had a station wagon and they had a couple of kids. We were sleeping in the back of the station wagon. We woke up because we were driving through the mountains. It was middle of the night. All of a sudden the car stopped. There were these flashing lights. They were stopping the traffic on the side of a mountain. There was a killing in progress. There was a man in the mountains that was getting maimed by mountain lions. Their logic was they didn't want anyone else to get harmed. The reason why they stopped everyone is this is so horrible. They couldn't go in and help the guy. It was in the middle of the night, it was pitch black, it was in the jungle, and how mountain lions hunt their prey is one will attack until the prey is dead, and the other one will circle for anyone else who may try to approach and attack them. And if it hears any kind of threat or disturbance, it will go after that threat or disturbance. So it's protecting the kill. They knew this man was already beyond hope. So we had to sit there and listen to him scream until he stopped screaming. And once that happens, the other animal then comes in to share the prey. At that point, they can approach the animals because now they're distracted. So that happened, and I think about that, and it was a very intense way to learn about the cycle of life and death. So this was just in our existence now. This was in our lives now. We had experienced this. We continue our journey. This is just to fill in what all of this journey entailed. And so we continued our journey. We were supposed to meet someone who was guiding us to go up into the mountains and live with the Indians. They drove us into the mountain as far as they could, and the rest on foot was a 3-day journey. Part of the way up, there was a cabin, an American guy and a friend of his and a woman there. It was basically a stopover for whoever needed it, traveling in and out of the mountains. The second guy did not speak at all. The American man spoke very little because he was hung up in a hammock and he had been stung on the ankle by a scorpion. It was very difficult for him to kind of stay conscious, and he was going through this, the sweating and, sweating out the toxins and dealing with this poison. His ankle was literally like the size of my head is now. It was very, very frightening. And yes, there are scorpions all throughout Mexico. We even had some in our house. At one point, they're freaky. When people say, ooh, there's ants, I'm like, yeah, there's worse stuff that could be out there for you. So I don't always have a lot of sympathy that people are like, oh, there's a couple ants in my house. Okay, just that's easy to get rid of. When there's a freaking scorpion in your house, you don't know if you can sleep. We literally slept back in our house in Chilam. We had straw hammocks and we would hang them from the walls, and there were hooks in the walls so that you could be suspended off the ground so that scorpions didn't get you in your sleep. Kind of forgot to mention that part. This guy was in and out of consciousness. The other guy was not speaking at all. The woman had to go back to wherever she was from. My mom and I stayed there for a few days, and mom's setting up our hammock. There is some food. We brought some food with us, and we're foraging stuff from the jungle as well, because my mom knows pretty much everything there is to know about plants. Plus, she was learning about them at the time too, and she had studied up on what was edible then. She was putting poultices on the guy's ankle, and the other guy not speaking. Our second night there, my mom and I were sleeping in a sleeping bag in a hammock together. In the morning, I saw that there were little bloody tracks on our sleeping bag. A vampire bat had kind of hopped on the sleeping blanket in the hand. My mom didn't know what it was, but she felt something hopping up, and she waited until it got high enough, and she just whacked it really hard and knocked it off the hammock. So she must have knocked it silly, because the thing didn't come back. But I didn't see the evidence of this until the next morning. And I was like, vampire bats? What? So of course I'm thinking actual vampires, because I'm young. But my mom was always really honest with me and always really truthful with me so that I wouldn't, go crazy in my imagination. So I really am grateful to her for that. After that night, I think it was the third day we were there, and it was just a guide, and he was continuing to the mountains, so we went with him. We get up to the top of these mountains, and we end up living in this village with the Indians there. It was dirt floor huts, no running water. We had a river going through, no electricity, and no running water, and it was amazing. We stayed with them for a while, and I actually do have a picture of me that I will try to find. And if I find it, I will insert it here. That was in Palenque. And from there, we went to some of the sacred sites. We had gone to Tulum before it became a big tourist trap. And from there we went to Chichen Itza. Chichen Itza, it's very, very interesting. I'm sure you heard about how some of the pyramids in Mexico are very similar to those in Giza in Egypt. I've been to Teotihuacan. Actually, that's where I went a few years ago, and their pyramids and the structure of their city and the smaller pyramids are exactly like the ones in Giza on Pharaoh's Row. So we ended up going to Chichen Itza, and this was before a lot of it was, I guess a lot of it's now closed to the public, but we saw where there were snake pits that they would sacrifice virgins. I was able to go into the base of that grand pyramid because there used to be an entrance to go down inside of it. The inside of this room had all hieroglyphs or petroglyphs, whichever you want to call them, and a huge stone tablet in the center of the room. The stone tablet looked like a control panel. Here I am, 4 or 5 years old, and it looks like a control panel to me. Now, you know, if you watch Ancient Aliens or anything, they talk about how there were people from space that came there, and they said that there too. They said, no, this is how they could travel into the skies, and this is a depiction of how they did that. So I knew that for a long time before Ancient Aliens came around. I've known that for almost all of my life. When you're 4 or 5, everything's like, oh, so that exists. Oh, so that's part of the world. I'm like, okay, so they went to outer space and other people from outer space came here. Sure, okay. So it's just always been kind of part of my belief system. So we're there, and one day we're outside the gates. We're about to finish up for the day and head down to a place that we're staying down the mountain. They were the equivalent of like Greyhound buses right at the entrance, like right at the gate. We went up to one bus, and I guess they were going to a different location. She was trying to find out like when a bus was coming to bring us to where we needed to go. She was getting a little frantic and she was pulling me back and forth, and I was tired, so she told me, okay, just stand here and talk to this bus driver, because she knew the bus driver wasn't going to go anywhere with me. So she put me at the foot of the bus. She's like, just stand here and talk to the bus driver. I will be right back. I see her go behind the bus, and she's going across the road. I thought I heard her call me. So I run out behind the bus and I start to run across the road, and here comes another Greyhound bus. It hits me. I was dead at the scene, and I remember the bus coming. I remember putting my hands up. It hit my hands, it hit my head, and I remember when I was going back, seeing the trees as I'm going backwards, and then the underside of the bus going over me. And thank God I was dead center in the bus, so I didn't have like tires rolling over my body. And I remember hitting the back of my head. And that's the last thing I remember until I'm looking at everything from above. And I feel like I'm 15, 20 feet above. And at that time, there were no hotels or any tourist things, you know, like buildings and stuff on the mountain. At that time, indigenous people lived on that mountain just outside of the ruins, and they were direct descendants of the people from the ruins. And apparently they kind of kept an eye on things, although you would never know they were there. And 3 shaman came out of the jungle, 3 medicine men came out of the jungle and picked me up and started chanting and passing me between them. No CPR, no compressions, no breath. They just started chanting and passing me between them. And that's what brought me back to life. So, as a side note, when I hear so many people saying that they're shaman now, I have a very deep reverence for what true indigenous shaman are and what they can do. So that's why I will never call myself a shaman, because it is a lifetime and it is powerful. I have studied with a shaman. I have met some real shaman since then. I have a huge, huge reverence for shaman, because they actually not just saved my life, they brought me back to life. They literally brought me back from death. So at this point, they don't even speak the same kind of Spanish that everyone does. And there just happened to be a doctor of ancient dialects. He understood their speech. They told my mother, "We will have your daughter back in 3 days." And they took me into the jungle. And she tried to follow them. She couldn't find the path. She couldn't find... They disappeared into the jungle with me.